The wind tore across the jagged cliffs with a roar that seemed to shake the very earth beneath her feet. Lila Marston's fingers scraped against the rough edge of the stone as she struggled to maintain her balance, her skirts whipping around her legs like wild flames. Below stretched a canyon so deep and dark it swallowed the faint glimmer of the river snaking its way through the rocks. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing the terror that clawed at her throat. "You're making a mistake, Lila," said the man behind her, his voice smooth yet venomous like silk hiding steel. His hand gripped her arm with unnatural force, and his cold eyes bore into hers. "Say you'll marry me, and I swear I'll let you live." Lila shook her head violently, her auburn hair whipping across her face. "I'll never marry you, Jasper," she spat, each word a defiance against the fear threatening to overwhelm her. Jasper Kincaid laughed, a sound devoid of warmth echoing against the canyon walls. He was a man known throughout the territories not for honor or courage, but for ruthlessness, wealth, and a penchant for breaking people to suit his whims. "Then you'll learn what happens to those who defy me," he sneered. His hand tightened, and Lila felt herself sliding ever closer to the cliff's edge. Panic surged through her. She kicked at him, clawed at his coat, but it was futile. His grip was iron, his intentions unrelenting. She swallowed a scream, her breath cold in the wind, when a voice rang out, breaking the terror like a blade. "Let her go." The sound was deep, commanding, and utterly foreign to her ears. Lila froze, startled. From across the ridge, a figure emerged, emerging from the fading light of the setting sun. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a quiet power that made the ground itself seem to pay attention to his steps. His long black hair streamed behind him, adorned with beads and feathers that caught the amber light. And a long leather coat clung to his frame, worn but practical, carrying the scent of smoke and pine. Jasper's face twisted in derision. "And who's going to stop me? You?" The man, clearly a Comanche warrior by his bearing and attire, spurred his horse forward. Lila barely had time to register his movement before he leapt from the saddle, landing between her and Jasper with a grace that was almost inhuman. His eyes were dark, smoldering, yet contained a calm that sent a strange reassurance through Lila's fear-stricken body. "I warned you," the warrior said, his voice low and steady. "Leave the girl be." Jasper laughed, the sound harsh and sharp as a whip crack. "You think you can stop me?" In a blur of motion, the Comanche grabbed Lila's hand and yanked her backward just as a jagged rock shifted under Jasper's foot. He stumbled, a curse spilling from his lips, teetering dangerously close to the abyss. Lila felt a cold gust against her face as she nearly went over, and then firm hands pulled her onto solid ground. "Hold on," he said, voice calm but infused with a power that made surrender impossible. Lila gasped, her knees weak, her fingers still trembling from the near plunge. She stared at him, searching for a name, a clue, anything human in this figure who had appeared like a spirit from the canyon mist. Who are you?" She managed to choke out. "My name is Tayanita," he said, still keeping his focus on Jasper, who had regained his balance and was glaring at them both with murderous intent. "And you are safe for now." Jasper's eyes blazed with fury as he backed away, his hands raised in mock surrender. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I'll see you both dead." Then, with a fury-filled curse, he disappeared down the rocky trail, swallowed by the canyon's shadowy depths. Lila sank to her knees, the reality of her survival only now beginning to settle in. She looked at Tayanita, really looked, taking in the sharp angles of his face, the confident yet fluid way he moved, the long hair and tribal jewelry catching what little light remained. In the midst of terror, hope sparked within her. "Are you really going to protect me?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Tayanita nodded. "I am, but we must move quickly." Kincaid will not stop at threats. He will come for you again." The wind whistled around them, carrying the scents of pine, stone, and distant smoke. Lila's mind raced. She had grown up on the Marston homestead, a farmstead isolated and proud in the far reaches of the territories. She was no stranger to hardship, but this was unlike anything she had ever faced. Her father had died when she was 12, defending their land from marauders, leaving her to shoulder responsibility for their survival. And now, a man like Jasper thought he could claim her life, her freedom, her very existence as a bargaining chip. "We have to go," Tayanita said, helping her to her feet. "The town of Timber Hollow is not far. There you will find protection." Lila nodded, gathering herself. Her skirts were torn, her hands scraped, but determination set her jaw. She had survived more than she knew, and she wasn't about to let Jasper Kincaid decide her fate. The path down the cliff was treacherous. Each step was measured, careful, with Tayanita guiding her. His presence was both reassuring and awe-inspiring. He moved with an ease that spoke of years surviving in untamed lands, and the way he protected her was instinctive, fierce, yet never patronizing. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Lila shivered, her breath misting in the cold air. Tayanita noticed and produced a blanket, draped over her shoulders with a simple, respectful gesture. The warmth seeped through her, not just physically but emotionally, a reminder that not all men sought to control, that some fought to preserve freedom. They camped briefly beneath the shelter of a pine grove, the wind still howling above them. Lila watched Tayanita move with quiet precision, preparing a small fire without drawing unnecessary attention. Sparks danced upwards, mingling with the drifting snowflakes that had begun to fall. "You saved me," Lila said after a moment, her voice softer now. "Why?" Tayanita sat across the fire from her, eyes reflecting the flames. "Because no one has the right to take another person's freedom. And because some acts demand courage, even when the world does not understand them." Lila felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had known fear and oppression all her life. Her father's death had left her vulnerable. The town's whispers had often carried judgment, and now Jasper had tried to end her life over nothing more than a refusal. And yet, here was a man who didn't ask for anything, didn't seek to own her. He simply acted, decisively, justly. Sleep came fitfully that night. The fire's warmth did little to soothe the lingering adrenaline, and Lila found herself waking at every whisper of the wind, expecting Jasper's return. But Tayanita remained vigilant, scanning the shadows with eyes that missed nothing. When dawn finally arrived, painting the world in hues of pale gold and silver frost, Lila knew she had survived something extraordinary. The danger was not yet over, she could feel it, but for the first time, she felt the fragile, heady pulse of hope. Tayanita helped her to her feet. "We move now," he said. "Timber Hollow waits. There you will find safety, and there we will plan our next steps. But you must be ready for anything. Jasper will not surrender easily." Lila swallowed, gripping the satchel she had taken from the homestead, her fingers brushing over her father's old notes, the small things that reminded her of the life she fought to preserve. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "I won't let him win." The two of them descended the trail, Tayanita leading, Lila following with a determination born of terror and survival. The canyon stretched endlessly beside them, a chasm of danger and possibility. Every step was cautious, every breath measured. But as they rode into the morning light, Lila felt something she had not felt in years, a sense of purpose. A fire that refused to be extinguished, and the certainty that no matter what came, she would not be alone, for in the vast, untamed lands of the Old West, courage was not the absence of fear, was the decision to move forward. even when the abyss threatened to swallow you whole. And Lila Marston had decided she would not fall. The forest of Timber Hollow was alive with sound, yet the noise felt muted compared to the roar of the cliffs the day before. Snow crunched beneath their boots, brittle and powdery, as Lila followed Tayanita along the winding trail. The air was sharp, biting at her cheeks, and her breath rose in pale clouds that dissipated into the gray morning. Every tree seemed to loom, its skeletal branches heavy with frost, and shadows stretched across the path like dark fingers. Warning of hidden dangers. Tayanita rode slightly ahead, his horse steady and sure-footed on the slippery trail. He glanced back at her once, a calm look in his dark eyes, and she felt a strange reassurance in it. His long black hair caught the early sunlight, glinting like polished onyx against the whiteness of the snow. Beads and feathers in his hair swayed with his movements, adding a rhythm that felt almost musical against the backdrop of the forest. Despite the cold and the tension, he moved with the ease of a man at home in the wilderness, a predator in harmony with the land. "I can't believe he actually tried to throw me off that cliff," Lila said quietly, more to herself than to Tayanita. Her voice trembled, a mixture of lingering fear and disbelief. "I've faced storms, wild animals. But him?" She swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "I thought I was going to die." Tayanita did not answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of a knife at his hip. Then, softly, he said, "Jasper Kincaid does not value human life. He values control. That is why he tried to take yours." Lila's fists clenched at her sides. "Why me? Why anyone?" Her voice cracked. "I've done nothing to him. I've never even spoken to him except once at the market." "He is not a man who reasons with the world," Tayanita said. "He will not listen to excuses. Only strength, only courage, and only preparedness can keep you safe from someone like him." They walked in silence for a time, the forest closing around them like a cathedral. Every snap of a twig made Lila jump, but Tayanita's presence kept the panic at bay. It was as though his calm had a gravity all its own, anchoring her fear to something manageable. For the first time since Jasper had tried to kill her, Lila allowed herself to breathe fully. Though her nerves were still taut like bowstrings, the trail sloped downward, and the distant sounds of Timber Hollow began to reach them, the clatter of wagon wheels, the occasional shout, the low murmur of voices carried faintly on the wind. The town was not far, but the tension in Lila's chest did not ease. Timber Hollow was unfamiliar territory, and while it might provide safety, she knew towns were never free from judgment, gossip, or danger. As they rounded a bend, Lila spotted movement, a small herd of deer grazing cautiously between the trees. The snow crunched softly under their hooves, and the animals' ears twitched, alert to any disturbance. Lila felt a brief flicker of peace at the sight, a reminder that life continued even amid fear and peril. "You saved my life," she said after a moment, breaking the silence again. "Why? I mean, you don't even know me." Tayanita dismounted, swinging gracefully from his horse to land on the snow-covered ground. He approached her and held out a gloved hand. "I do not need to know you to recognize what is right. You were in danger. I intervened because it was the right thing to do. There are some lines one does not cross." His words were simple, yet the conviction behind them resonated deep within her. Lila hesitated before taking his hand, feeling warmth and strength radiate through his grip. He helped steady her as she regained her footing, and she realized that she was not merely grateful, she felt an unexpected sense of trust, fragile yet undeniable. Hours passed as they trudged through the forest. Lila's feet grew sore, her fingers numb despite the mittens Tayanita had given her. Yet with every step, she learned to watch the forest not with fear, but with awareness. Tayanita taught her how to notice subtle shifts in the wind, how to recognize tracks in the snow, and how to move quietly, listening for signs of Jasper or his men. She was learning skills she had never imagined herself possessing, and it filled her with a new kind of strength. When the sun was high, filtering through the trees like pale gold, Tayanita led her to a small clearing. He set down a pack he had been carrying and motioned for her to sit. Inside were blankets, dried meat, and a small flask of water. Lila sank onto the snow, grateful for the respite. "You've done so much for me," she said, her voice softening. "I feel like I can't even thank you properly." Tayanita knelt beside her, careful not to invade her space. "The world does not always offer thanks. The world is harsh. What matters is survival and justice. That is what we are ensuring now." Lila nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun or the fire. For the first time in weeks, she did not feel entirely alone out as they resumed their trek. The trees thinned, revealing a wide view of Timber Hollow in the distance. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the town appeared peaceful from afar. Yet Lila's instincts warned her that Jasper's reach was long, and danger could arrive without warning. Upon entering the town, Lila immediately sensed the scrutiny. Eyes followed her, whispers trailed behind them. Some townsfolk stared openly, while others shot furtive glances, avoiding any direct contact. Tayanita's calm presence remained beside her, though his gaze was sharp, noting potential threats among the crowd. "Why are they looking at us like that?" Lila asked, her voice low, tension lacing her words. "They do not know me," Tayanita said quietly, "and Timber Hollow is cautious of outsiders. We will find the mayor. Only he can offer the protection you need." They approached the town hall, where a small group of townsfolk had gathered, watching them with curiosity and caution. The mayor, a stout man with spectacles perched on his nose and a serious expression, emerged from the building. "Lila Marston?" he asked, his voice betraying surprise. "And you? Who are you?" "This is Tayanita," Lila said firmly. "He saved my life from a man named Jasper Kincaid. I need your help. He tried to kill me." The mayor's eyes widened, and he glanced at Tayanita with a mixture of suspicion and respect. "Kincaid? That man has terrorized Timber Hollow before. If he is after you—" He shook his head gravely, the weight of understanding clear in his expression. "I need more than words," Lila said, desperation creeping into her voice. "He tried to throw me off a cliff. He'll stop at nothing to get what he wants." Tayanita stepped forward, his posture calm and commanding. "I can ensure her safety," he said, "but we may need to act before he strikes again." The mayor's expression shifted from concern to determination. "Then you will stay in the hall tonight. I will summon my deputies and make preparations. We cannot allow Kincaid to terrorize another innocent life." Lila exhaled, the tension easing slightly. The fear still lingered, but for the first time since Jasper had tried to end her life, she felt a glimmer of hope. She glanced at Tayanita, who nodded subtly, his expression unreadable yet reassuring. That night, as Lila lay on a cot in the town hall, the events of the past days replayed in her mind the cliff. Jasper's cruel grin, the sheer terror of falling, and Tayanita's presence, unwavering and protective. She realized that she had survived not only the threat of Jasper's violence but the fear that had long haunted her life since her father's death. Tayanita remained vigilant outside, pacing silently, listening to the wind and the faint sounds of Timber Hollow settling into the night. Lila felt a strange comfort in knowing he was there, a sentinel against the darkness that threatened to overtake her dot in the early hours. As the first light of dawn began to pale the night sky, Lila found herself staring out the window at the snow-dusted rooftops. Timber Hollow was quiet, peaceful, and yet she knew that Jasper's threat was far from over. She would have to be strong, courageous, and clever if she were to survive the trials ahead. When Tayanita returned, he carried a small bundle of food and water. He handed it to her silently, then motioned for her to follow. "We must move," he said. "The longer we wait, the greater the risk. Jasper will not stop until he gets what he wants." Lila nodded, determination settling in her chest. The fear of yesterday had not vanished, but it had transformed into resolve. She was no longer a helpless girl at the cliff's edge. She was a young woman who had survived death, and she would continue to survive. Together they left the safety of Timber Hollow for the day, moving carefully through the snowy forest. Lila felt the strange mix of fear and exhilaration, the knowledge that danger was near, and the understanding that she was not powerless. She had Tayanita by her side, and together they would face whatever came next. The forest stretched endlessly around them, a maze of snow and shadow. And Lila realized something she had not before. She had the strength to face Jasper Kincaid, and perhaps to shape her own destiny. The journey was far from over. The first light of dawn crept across the cliffs surrounding Timber Hollow, painting the landscape in shades of orange and pink. But it did little to calm the tension that gripped Lila's chest. From their vantage point atop a small ridge, she could see the town below. Still quiet in the early hour, its snow-covered rooftops glinting faintly under the rising sun. Yet in the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of Jasper Kincaid and his men. Riding fast and determined, their intent unmistakable. Lila's fingers tightened around the strap of her satchel, the weight of both fear and resolve pressing into her. "He's coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I can see him." Tayanita's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon with a predator's focus. "Yes," he said, voice low but steady. "And they do not come for idle reasons. He will not stop until he claims what he wants. But today he will learn that you are not prey." Lila looked at him, studying the calm strength in his dark eyes, the quiet authority in the way he moved. Despite the danger, she felt a flicker of hope, a strange sense of security that only his presence could give. She had survived cliffs, threats, and fear itself. And now, with Tayanita by her side, she had a chance to face Jasper Kincaid head-on. They descended carefully into Timber Hollow, moving along hidden paths and snow-covered alleys. The townsfolk had begun to stir, peeking from behind shutters and doors, their expressions a mix of curiosity, fear, and cautious optimism. Whispers spread quickly through the town, as they always did, but this time, Lila could feel that the rumors carried a note of hope, a belief that perhaps this time, Kincaid would be stopped. Tayanita paused at the edge of the main street, signaling for Lila to stay close. "Remember," he said softly, "we fight not for vengeance alone, but for your life and the lives of those who cannot defend themselves. Keep your focus. Trust in your instincts." Lila nodded, her jaw set. She felt the old surge of adrenaline, the fire of determination she had discovered on the cliff still burning in her chest. Fear was there, yes, but it was tempered now by courage. She would not be a victim today. Not again. From the ridge across the town, Jasper Kincaid and his gang of rough-looking men came into view, their horses kicking up snow as they rode with reckless intent. Jasper's eyes locked on the town hall, on the ridge where he expected Lila to be cornered, and then flicked over the streets, sizing up his advantage. He had always been a man who relied on intimidation, on brute force, and on the fear he instilled in others. But today, he was about to discover that fear alone would not win him this battle. Tayanita moved with swift precision, signaling townsfolk who had been armed discreetly to take positions along rooftops, alleyways, and behind barricades. He worked silently, efficiently, blending the expertise of a warrior with the leadership skills that inspired trust in those around him. Lila watched, amazed at how natural his authority seemed, how effortlessly he commanded attention without arrogance. Without cruelty, Jasper's men reached the edge of the town square, and his voice carried like a whip. "Bring her to me," he shouted, "now." Lila's heart pounded, but she did not flinch. She stayed behind Tayanita, observing the scene with a mixture of fear and determination. She realized, perhaps for the first time, how vital it was to remain calm in the midst of chaos, to act with purpose rather than panic. The confrontation began swiftly. One of Jasper's men lunged toward Tayanita, thinking to strike first, but Tayanita moved like water, deflecting the attack and sending the man sprawling. Others tried to flank him, but the townsfolk, guided by his strategic positioning, intercepted with knives, clubs, and sheer determination. The snow beneath their boots became churned and slippery, but the defenders moved with agility and purpose. Jasper's eyes burned with fury as he realized that his intimidation alone would not work. He charged forward himself, a rifle in hand, but Tayanita met him with a skill that seemed almost supernatural in its precision. A swift maneuver, a redirection of force, and Jasper was hurled back onto the snow, his weapon skidding across the street. Lila gasped, clutching the strap of her satchel, and then felt a strange surge of pride as she realized the man who had terrorized her life for so long was now powerless before Tayanita's calm authority. She had never felt more alive, more aware of the fragility and strength of life intertwined. Jasper scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. He lunged again, this time aiming to strike Tayanita with the butt of his rifle. But Tayanita caught the weapon with ease, twisting it from Jasper's grasp and sending him sprawling once more. The townsfolk surged forward, pinning the remaining gang members, their initial fear replaced by a determined resolve. For a moment, the entire square seemed suspended in tension, the sound of breath, snow, and distant wind filling the void between the combatants. Lila felt a chill run through her, not from the cold, but from the realization that this was the culmination of everything she had feared and yet hoped for. The fight was messy, brutal, and swift, but the outcome was becoming increasingly clear. Tayanita moved with relentless precision, disarming, redirecting, and defending without hesitation. Jasper, who had relied on intimidation and brute strength all his life, found himself overwhelmed, humiliated, and powerless. With a final, swift maneuver, Tayanita pinned him to the snow-covered ground, securing him with ropes found nearby. The other men were rounded up by the townsfolk, their threats neutralized by the combined force of Tayanita's strategy and the town's courage. Lila stepped forward cautiously, feeling the weight of triumph mixed with lingering fear. She looked down at Jasper Kincaid, tied and defeated, his face red with humiliation and rage. It was a stark reminder of how fragile power truly was when challenged by skill, courage, and justice. Tayanita turned to her, his eyes dark but gentle. "It is done," he said quietly. "He will not harm you again." Lila exhaled, relief washing over her like a sudden thaw. She had survived not just the threat of violence, but the fear that had shadowed her entire life. Jasper Kincaid, who had seemed unstoppable, had been defeated by strategy, courage, and the unwillingness to accept injustice. The townsfolk began to gather around, their expressions a mixture of awe and gratitude. Lila could hear whispers, stories already forming of the Comanche warrior who had defended the girl from the ruthless land baron. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of belonging, of community, of shared triumph. As the sun rose higher, warming the snow-covered streets, Lila realized something profound. She had not only survived but had become part of something larger than herself. The terror that had haunted her, The threat that had once seemed insurmountable had been confronted and overcome. And she had Tayanita by her side, a presence of unwavering strength and quiet understanding. For the first time, she allowed herself a smile, hesitant but genuine. She had feared being powerless, being at the mercy of others, but now she understood that courage, action, and alliance could transform even the most desperate situation. She had faced death, defied tyranny, and discovered a strength within herself she had never known existed. Jasper Kincaid remained bound, a reminder of the darkness that had threatened her life. But he was no longer a threat. The town had witnessed his defeat, and Lila knew that the stories of his cruelty would be overshadowed by the courage and skill that had stopped him. Tayanita walked beside her as they made their way to the town hall, where the mayor had waited anxiously. "The threat is over," Tayanita said simply. "For now. But vigilance is always necessary." Lila nodded, feeling the truth in his words. Danger could return, as it often did in the Old West, but she no longer felt powerless. She had survived the cliffs, Jasper's cruelty, and the uncertainty of Timber Hollow. She had survived, and in that survival, she had discovered resilience, courage, and an unexpected sense of hope. Inside the town hall, the mayor greeted them with a mix of relief and admiration. "You've done it," he said, his voice carrying the weight of both gratitude and awe. "You faced a threat that many believed unstoppable. Timber Hollow owes you both a debt." Lila looked at Tayanita, her chest still pounding from the adrenaline of the confrontation. He met her gaze, the hint of a small, approving smile touching his lips. It was not pride born of vanity, but of respect for her courage, her resolve, and the partnership they had formed under extraordinary circumstances. As the morning light streamed through the windows, painting the room in a warm glow, Lila felt a quiet but profound sense of peace. The danger had passed, at least for now, and Timber Hollow had survived. She had survived. And alongside Tayanita, she felt ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Outside, the snow continued to glisten in the sun, and for the first time, Lila allowed herself to imagine a life beyond fear. Jasper Kincaid's shadow had been lifted, and she could step forward into a world where courage, hope, and determination shaped her path rather than terror or oppression. She had survived the cliffs, the forest, and the darkness of a man's cruelty. She had survived, and she would continue to survive. The sun hung low over Timber Hollow, casting long golden shadows across the snow-covered streets. The town had settled into a tense calm, but the threat of Jasper Kincaid still lingered in the cold wind that swept down from the hills. Lila Marston watched from the town hall's balcony as Tayanita patrolled the perimeter, his dark figure moving with a quiet authority that seemed to command both the snow and the townsfolk. Despite yesterday's victory, she knew the battle was far from over. Men like Jasper did not disappear quietly. They simmered, they plotted, and they struck when least expected. Her fingers traced the edge of the railing as she thought about how her life had changed in a matter of days. The memory of the cliff, Jasper's cruel grip, and the terror that had nearly claimed her life seemed both distant and immediate, like echoes that refused to fade. She shivered, partly from the cold, partly from the lingering adrenaline, and yet a strange sense of resolve steadied her. She would not be victimized again. Not now, not ever. A sudden clatter of hooves on the main street drew her attention. Lila's heart leapt into her throat as she saw Jasper Kincaid himself riding into the town, flanked by a few desperate men who had managed to escape yesterday's confrontation. His face was a storm of fury and humiliation, the kind of anger that came from losing control over everything he believed was rightfully his. Tayanita's hand fell instinctively to the hilt of his knife, his posture shifting into a protective stance. He met Jasper's gaze with a calm that made Lila's chest tighten. Jasper's eyes flickered with rage, and for the first time he seemed unsure, as if the presence of Tayanita and the resolve in the town had unsettled him. "You think you can defy me?" Jasper shouted, his voice carrying across the snow-covered street. "I will have her, Tayanita. You cannot stop me." Tayanita did not flinch. "You cannot harm her," he said, his voice quiet yet powerful, carrying the weight of unshakable certainty. "Leave Timber Hollow, Jasper Kincaid, and never return. If you do, it will be the last mistake you ever make." The standoff stretched, the cold wind howling through the streets, carrying the scent of snow, sweat, and fear. Lila felt the tension in her chest tighten, but she refused to step back. She had survived fear, cruelty, and near death. She would not shrink now. Jasper's hands curled around the reins of his horse. He spat to the side, rage making his face red and jagged in expression. "You think a Comanche warrior and a town full of peasants can stop me? I will take what is mine, and you both of you will regret it." Tayanita stepped forward slightly, his eyes locking with Jasper's in a silent challenge. Lila could feel the energy shift, the atmosphere crackling with the potential for violence. Yet she realized that she had changed too. No longer the frightened girl clinging to life on a cliff. She now stood tall, ready to face her oppressor, ready to see justice done. Before Jasper could react further, a group of Timber Hollow's men emerged from behind the town hall, armed with rifles, shotguns, and determination. They had learned from yesterday's events, their fear replaced by the resolve to defend their town and the girl they had come to admire for her bravery. Jasper's eyes flicked from Tayanita to the armed townsfolk and back again. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his gaze. Rage alone was no longer enough. He had underestimated the bond of courage and loyalty, the strength of a town united by the protection of one young woman's life. Lila took a deep breath, her voice clear and steady. "Jasper Kincaid," she said, her words carrying across the street, "you will not harm me. You will not terrorize this town. You will leave or face the consequences of your actions." Jasper laughed, bitter and sharp. "Consequences? I am the consequence, girl. You cannot stop me." Tayanita moved swiftly, positioning himself between Lila and Jasper. His movements were fluid, precise, a combination of strength, skill, and instinct honed over years. Lila felt a sense of awe and relief wash over her. She knew that with Tayanita, they were not just defending themselves, they were asserting that cruelty and tyranny had limits, that justice could prevail. The standoff escalated quickly. Jasper charged, swinging a heavy riding crop, attempting to strike Tayanita, but the warrior deflected with ease, redirecting his momentum and unbalancing him. The townsfolk acted in unison, blocking escape routes and encircling the remaining gang members. Every step was measured, every movement deliberate. Jasper's confidence wavered under the combined force of skill, courage, and strategy. Lila could see the moment when the tide truly turned. Jasper's horse skidded on the icy street, throwing him off balance. Tayanita's hand was on him instantly, steadying him before he could regain control. The townsfolk moved in, ropes and chains ready, and Jasper realized, with a surge of disbelief and fury, that he had been completely outmaneuvered. He struggled, spat and shouted, but it was useless. The combined force of Tayanita and Timber Hollow's citizens restrained him. Lila watched as the man who had once seemed invincible, who had terrorized her and threatened her life, was finally powerless before the determination of those he sought to dominate. Tayanita looked at Lila, his expression calm but fierce. "It is finished," he said. "He will not rise again to threaten you or this town." Lila nodded, feeling tears of relief and triumph prick her eyes. The terror that had haunted her life, the fear that had driven her into hiding, was finally over. She had survived, and justice had been served not through revenge, but through courage, strategy, and unyielding resolve. The townsfolk cheered softly, a mixture of relief and admiration, though the quiet dignity of the moment was not lost. Lila felt a hand at her shoulder and turned to see Tayanita standing beside her. His dark eyes, normally so unreadable, carried a hint of approval, of quiet pride in her bravery and resilience. "You were strong," he said simply. "You faced fear, and you survived. That is courage." Lila smiled faintly, a smile tinged with exhaustion, relief, and a sense of newfound strength. "I had to be," she said. "I could not let him win. Not ever again." The mayor approached, a mixture of gratitude and awe on his face. "Timber Hollow owes you both a debt it can never fully repay," he said. "You have saved not just one life, but the integrity and safety of this town." Lila looked around at the townsfolk, at the buildings dusted with snow, at the horizon where the mountains cut against the sky. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace. She had faced death, cruelty, and fear, and had emerged not only alive but stronger, wiser, and more confident in her own power. Jasper Kincaid was taken into custody, bound and helpless, his threats finally silenced by the determination and bravery of those he had underestimated. Lila knew he would face justice, not vengeance, and that knowledge settled a weight she hadn't realized she'd carried for so long. Tayanita stayed close, his presence a quiet reassurance. "The danger is gone," he said. "But remember, courage is not just about surviving one battle. It is about standing for what is right, even when the world tests you again." Lila nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon, the town, the snow-covered landscape. She had learned the true meaning of survival, of bravery, of partnership, and of hope. She realized that her life, once dominated by fear and the shadow of a cruel man, was now her own to shape. "Thank you," she said quietly, "not just for saving her life, but for showing her that strength, skill, and heart could overcome cruelty." Tayanita's eyes softened. "It was never just me," he said. "It was you. Your courage brought others together. Your spirit carried the weight of justice." The wind carried the scent of pine and snow, and Lila felt it as a promise of life beyond fear, beyond oppression, beyond tyranny. Timber Hollow had witnessed cruelty and danger, but it had also witnessed bravery, alliance, and triumph. And Lila, who had once stood on the edge of a cliff, had found her place not just in survival, but in shaping her own destiny. As they walked through the streets, the townsfolk offering smiles and quiet nods of respect, Lila felt a sense of belonging she had never known. She had faced death and terror, but she had emerged with her dignity, her life, and her hope intact. She glanced at Tayanita, a silent acknowledgment passing between them, a bond forged in danger, trust, and shared triumph. The sun dipped lower, painting the snow in amber and gold, and Lila realized she was finally free. Free from Jasper's cruelty, free from fear, and free to live her life on her own terms. The cliff, the forest, the terror, and the struggle were behind her, replaced by possibility, strength, and the quiet knowledge that she could face whatever came next. Jasper Kincaid was gone. Defeated, a shadow of the man who had once seemed unstoppable. Timber Hollow would heal, and its people would remember the courage that had saved them. And Lila Marston, once a frightened girl on a cliff's edge, would step forward into a life defined not by fear, but by strength, resilience, and hope. Tayanita walked beside her, his presence a steady reminder that courage and compassion could coexist, that survival and justice could be intertwined, and that some bonds formed in moments of peril could last a lifetime. Together they moved through Timber Hollow, the wind carrying snowflakes around them, the town alive with the quiet hum of life continuing. The story of fear, danger, and near loss had ended.